According to Theosophy, the mind is the soul. The mind and the soul are the same things. The soul is also referred to as our permanent individuality, in contrast to our present personality. John's going to talk to us about the doctrine of the eye as the mind turned outwards, the inward-looking mind representing the doctrine of the heart. Ultimately, we need both developed and balanced. So John's going to talk to us about the challenges we face, which is the battle between the lower, external focused mind and the higher intuitive mind, as we move our attention from the outward turned mind to the awakening to the inner soul, a more accurate reality is revealed. So welcome to John.
So what we're going to explore essentially is going to be the process of awakening spiritual potential, which incorporates the development of a perception that has a heart-mind focus. We'll also look at some of the practical steps to the operation of awakening the heart-mind. So first of all, when we're looking at the heart-mind, so according to Theosophy, as Richard just said, that the mind is the soul, or the mind and the soul are the same things. So that might be confusing for some of us who've come across this idea that we have two minds. We have what in Theosophy they call the lower mind and the higher mind, but that's not true. We only have one mind, and it's where the mind is focused that gives it its dual nature. So a mind that is focused in the outer world is often what we would call the desire mind, or Blavatsky called it the animal soul, while the mind that is focused in the inner self, the heart self, is called the intuitive mind, or the higher mind. So, you have to look at how you focus your attention to what aspect of the mind that you're using. So really what I'm talking about in this session is how to move our attention to that higher aspect, to that soul mind, or the mind, soul, ego. So that the triangle there represents, our higher nature. And it's the higher nature which is, in this context, our true self. And it's from that self that reincarnation takes place into our human nature, which is that square that you see there. And then we're the square, let's say. And certainly sometimes I feel square. And it's recognizing that as part of our human journey, the soul is what is learning. Okay, we think that we are the square, we are the personality, but we're not really. It's the soul that's doing the learning. So it's a conditioned view of reality that we have by viewing ourselves as just a personality. So straight away, to move, we have to deal with that incorrect perception that we have. If we look at, one of the most famous theosophical books is The Voice of the Silence. It's from Blavatsky, and I've said this before. Blavatsky wrote, volumes of books. If you stack them up, they'd probably be about that high off the floor. But the Secret Doctrine, which is only about that thick, says more than all those volumes put together. So it's a book that's worth reflecting on and studying. It's not the story of the book needs to be absorbed and reflected. You won't find answers by just simply reading the words. So it's almost a guide to meditation. In fact, The Voice of the Silence, the first volume, is a guide in steps to meditation. But in the second volume, which is called The Two Paths, she talks about there's two paths ahead of us. So the first is the path of the heart. It is the embodiment of Bodhi, the permanent the everlasting. So here she's talking about heart as soul wisdom, and Bodhi is the true divine self. Then the second one is the Dharma of the I, which embodies the external and the non-existing. So as part of our journey, we need to decide which path we're going to take. You know, the path of the I, let's say, is very much focused on the intellectual pursuit, very much personality focused or outward focused. While the journey of the heart is inward focused. You start not looking outward for your answers, but you start looking within yourselves for the answers that you're seeking. So it's quite a shift in focus. So it's stop relying on texts you find in books, but relying on what is being said inside yourself, listening to that voice inside yourself. So at this stage of humanity, the challenges we face are at this level of the mind. All our challenges are mental challenges, or you could call them psychological challenges perhaps. So there is a battle going on between what we've called our lower and higher mind. And once you start reflecting on your mind itself, you start to begin to see this battle. It's important first to recognize that there is such a battle going on, because often you can't do anything about it until there's recognition that there's some sort of struggle or conflict happening within yourself. So I just want to share a quote by Krishnamurti, which I think makes it even clearer, or perhaps for me it's clear anyway. He says that when the heart enters the mind, so when the heart enters the mind has quite a different quality. It is really then limitless, not only in its capacity to think, to act efficiently, but also in its sense of living in a vast space where you are part of everything else. When the heart enters the mind, the unity that we talk about in Theosophy becomes a reality. So it brings about a complete change of awareness and takes place. Well, a complete change of awareness takes place, and you truly experience the unity of life that lies at the very core of our soul. So let's try a little exercise. So wake up now, okay? I'm going to get you to try a little meditative exercise. You're going to do it twice. So the first thing I want you to do is just sit comfortably, so the energy's flowing well in your body. So relax yourself with a few deep breaths. So deep right down into your abdomen and out a few times. Now just for a short time, just observe your mind. Be aware of your thoughts that are coming into your mind. Take note of what comes into your mind, but don't dwell on it. So things will pop into your mind, observe them, don't follow them. Okay, now finish the exercise. Now bring your awareness back into the room. Now just share with the person beside you some of the thoughts that travelled through your mind. Of course, you might want to censor some, but share it with the person next to you. Some of the thoughts that travel through your mind. Okay, I'll give you a couple of minutes. So it sounds like some of you had quite a few thoughts. I've got a couple of questions here. Just reflect on these. Were you aware of any thoughts entering your mind? So anyone not aware of any thoughts that entered your mind? Okay, there's a couple. 3, 4, 5. Thanks for being honest. So no thoughts entered your mind. What a blissful state that would be. So did others have the same thoughts as you? So anyone put their hand up if the person you talked to had the same thoughts as you? No? Why not? Well, there's one. You know, there's only one thought field. We don't all have our own thought fields. Did you ever realise that? So why didn't you think the same thoughts as another person? You can answer, you know. Do you know? There's so many of them. Just floating around in the thought world. So your thoughts are tempered by your perception, by your conditioning. Most thoughts are habitual thoughts. Thoughts that you've repeatedly gone over and over again in your mind, like worries and anxieties. So when your mind is still, those are often the first things that come into your mind. So, where do you think your thoughts come from? I just gave you the answer, really.
From the ether.
From your perceptions, from your your conditioned nature, from your unconscious. But the thoughts are usually point to patterns that you've developed within your own nature. So by watching these thoughts, you can begin to recognize your patterns or the habits that you've developed in your life. Often they don't appear immediately when you have the thought. You have to dig a little bit deeper into it and ask yourself, okay, where did that thought come from? So you dig into yourself to try and find the origination of that thought. And then suddenly you uncover this whole perception that you've developed for some reason, perhaps because of an experience you've had, perhaps because of some sort of condition that has formed the way you think and the way you perceive life, or perhaps simply because of something you've read, which is not something that you know, but it's something that you've perceived as being true. So I'd like you to try this exercise again. So there's a slight variation in this one. So this time I'd like, instead of just watching the mind, I'd like you to breathe in and out and meditate. So it's a Buddhist type meditation. So when you're breathing in, count 1. And when you're breathing out, count 2. Then breathe in again, count 3. And breathe out again and count 4. Just repeat this until you get up to 10. And then when you get to 10, start again from 1 until 10. And just observe what you're doing as you're breathing in and breathing out. Okay, so take a deep breath, relax, and then breathe in. 1. Okay, so bring your mind back into the room. So was anyone able to get from 1 to 10 without forgetting where they were in their counting? Did you? Excellent. I get to about 4 and then my mind wanders off. Then I forget where I was at and I have to start again. But using a focus as part of the process makes it sometimes a little bit easier to see when your mind wanders off. And the idea is, just to be aware of what's going on in your mind when it wanders off. Then quietly bring it back and start counting again from scratch. So the important part of this exercise is to take note of what's going on in your mind. In fact, even write it down. And then come back to it later. Often, a thought pops up into our mind. We wander to the next thought, and to the next thought. Like how often do you wonder, you start meditating, you hear your cat, oh yes, I've got to get some milk for my cat. Then while I'm at the supermarket, I might as well grab this, and before you know it, you've got a huge shopping list in front of you, and you've completely lost your focus. So all we're trying to do here is recognize when thoughts start coming into our mind, and then bring our attention back to it. We're not trying to inhibit the thoughts, we're not trying to force our mind not to think, we're just creating an awareness here of what's going on in the mind. So, this is a reflective question again. So, are you aware of what it is within yourself that is observing the thoughts entering your mind? Are you aware that there's a part of you that is observing your thoughts entering your mind? At that point, you can do something about it. But when you start attaching yourself to the thoughts in your mind, then it becomes harder to detect those things. So the important point I'm trying to make here is to recognize that there is an observer within you. Some people call it a witness, that is aware of when a thought arises. And if you can if you can recognize as the thought arises, then you can prevent your awareness of getting attached to the thought. And you're just aware of the thought. And you don't give the thought energy, and it just disappears until the next thought comes up. So it's an exercise in awareness. So the true part of meditation, or meditation is a process which helps us to recognize the mind. And it's really the first stages of meditation that are important. The second stage is to recognize that you are actually the observer of what's going on. So for example, when Krishnamurti talks about the importance of choiceless awareness, have you come across that term before? It's a bit like mindfulness. So there's a part of you that's always aware of what's going on in your mind. So you're no longer an automatic. You're very much focused as a person and are completely in tune with what's going on. So your meditation stops being a 10-minute or 20-minute or an hour practice every day, but it becomes a permanent part of your reality, of your life. So every moment of your life, you're observing what's going on in your mind, what you're aware of. I know it's not easy to do when you're focusing on work, but your mind's being used then for whatever you're focusing on. But as soon as your mind is idle, you go back into that space of awareness. So in reality, the whole purpose of learning to meditate is a simple exercise to learn to take you back into that particular space as part of your daily life.
When you become aware of thoughts, then you're no longer thinking them,
you're just aware of them.
Aware of them, you're analysing them, so you've shifted into another mode.
That's right. That's what I call the witness mode. So you become aware of the thoughts as they come into your mind. And then the additional process is you ask yourself, Where did that thought come from?
But it stops the development of the thought. You're analysing the fact that you're aware of it, aren't you?
In this case, yes. Yeah. If you're obviously working, you need to use your mind with what you're working, and then you're using your mind for what it's made, what it's there for. So how does the heart enter the mind? How do we move awareness to the soul? So essentially, the practice is to learn to watch the mind, to be aware of the mind, and use your discrimination, your discernment with the thoughts that are happening or going through your mind, to be aware of them. And then ask yourselves, you know, where did this thought come from? Is this thought true? Is it helpful? And really look deeply at the thoughts that enter yourselves, to be willing to examine yourself. You know, much of the illness that we suffer in the world today is a result of inner disharmony or conflict, where our actions in this world do not align with what I would call universal values. So if there's a misalignment between universal values and my action, then that creates illness or dis-ease within my body. So, you know, one of the mechanisms of looking at yourself is looking at your diseases or ill health and asking yourself, what in my life caused that disharmony? So this is where this meditative process is very important, because many of the things that we do in this life are automatic. We don't even realize we're doing them. Yet it creates this disharmony within us. So the important thing is to look at this within ourselves. You know, and you can study do a comparative study of religions, and if you look at the main religions, you soon get to understand some of the key concepts in those religions, which are the underlying values that you're expected to live by. And one of the most common ones is harmlessness. In Sanskrit, it's often called ahimsa, you know, do no harm or do no violence. Now, so all the great religions have this as their first step on the journey. It is what they call a universal value: do no harm. So, if in your life, if your actions, if your thoughts, and if your words cause harm in some way to something else in the world, then you create that disharmony. And you get affected by that disharmony. And when you begin to realize that this is an actual law of nature, and this is one of the ways that karma works, you really become much more responsible for what you do in this world. That the whole concept of harmlessness really needs to be explored by each of us as individuals to understand fully what it means. You know, it's what creates the disunity amongst people, this harmlessness. You know, simple things like gossiping about somebody, or even creating perceptions about somebody else when they're not there to defend themselves. Those sort of things are so destructive in our world that it breaks us down. So we have to, if we're really interested in developing that heart, awakening that heart, we need to learn what these universal values are, and we need to make them a part of our life, which requires questioning every aspect of life that we live. No, not easy. You know, whoever said this journey is an easy journey? But you know, it's about, you know, looking at the nature of your mind and looking how it works. Are we kind? Are we helpful? Who said it? I heard someone talk about, you know, how develop compassion in the world. And the best way to develop compassion is to do good deeds for other people, but do them so they don't know you're doing it. You know? Think of some of those things. Do any of you remember the movie The Matrix? It's pretty dated now, so some of the young people at the back, do you know about it? The Matrix? Yeah. It's an amazing movie. It talks about, well, the movie's about someone that begins to realise that there's something wrong with the world they're living in. All sorts of strange things happen to them. And to cut a long story short, eventually they end up realising that the whole world they're living in is a dream. And they're able to wake up from the dream. And they wake up from the dream and they see everybody is asleep. It's quite a powerful visual image. So are we living in a dream? Yeah, we are. How do we wake up from this dream? So the dream is one that we've created with our mind, our perceptions, what we call our psychological mind. So we've created the reality we live in. And mostly, you know, on the surface, we all are happy with the reality we've created. But if we go deeper and talk at a deeper level to a person, we'll find that their reality is quite different from our reality. Yet somehow we're able to function in this reality. You know, you can marry someone and find that your partner is, their view of reality is quite different from yours. How many have found that? You know. And it's not that they're a bad person or anything else. It's just that their view of reality, their conditioning perception of reality is quite different from yours. So doesn't this show that we're all in some sort of dream? Maybe not, you know, that's just how you look at it. So how do you grow your awareness to awaken from the dream and perceive reality? So the first step required is one of simple observation, which was what that exercise was about. It is often described as meditation of reflection on the thoughts which arise in the mind. It's not about trying to inhibit those thoughts. Now, I began meditating when I was about 25, or I thought it was meditation, and now I'm, 65 this year, so that's quite a few years. And over the years, when you look back, you realise what a fool you really were in trying to meditate. So initially I would get up early in the morning and meditate for 20 minutes. And then when I reflected back, I found that I'd get up from sleep, go and sit down and meditate. And all I did in my meditation was fall back to sleep. So it wasn't a complete waste of time because it didn't always happen. And then I went through a period where I tried to stop the thoughts in my mind. And, then I realised that you actually can't stop the thoughts in your mind. All you have to do is stop paying attention to the thoughts in your mind. It's your mind's nature to think. And then I learned that, the thoughts in my mind can tell me a little bit about my conditioning. So, hey, let's look at these thoughts. And that opened a can of worms, which hasn't closed yet. So it's an unending process because we are so conditioned that you wouldn't believe. This dream is so strong that it's, you wouldn't believe how deeply we are caught up in this dream reality that we've created for ourselves. So meditation is a very good tool to use to observe ourselves, to connect with the watcher within ourselves, and hopefully make it a consistent part of our life. And for a while I had on my phone a little bell that used to ring once an hour at random times during the hour. And the reason for the bell was to bring you back to that point of observation. But even after a while you stop hearing the bell because you get so caught up in the world that the world that you've created for yourself, or the reality that you've created. quite funny because I had this phone in my pocket at one convention, and during the AGM, every hour, every 40 minutes or something, this bell used to go off, ding, ding. And everybody was looking around trying to find out, where this bell came from. I never said anything, but it was interesting to observe people's nature, looking up. So this is a good app that you can use. It's helpful on a phone. I tried to find it again because I keep changing phones, but I've never found the same one. So I just want to spend a little bit of time looking at the idea of pilgrims on a journey. So we are unconscious pilgrims on a soul journey. So it's the real pilgrim is not the personality, but it's the soul. So as we awaken to the reality of the journey, centered in choiceless awareness, the road of self-discovery has begun, opening and centering ourselves in the heart-mind. So we then awaken from the dream to the true heart connection. So pilgrim stories tend to be very much allegories. So for me, an allegory is a story which reflects the journey that everybody's taking. So for example, the story of Jesus in the Bible that we have. On the surface, you can see that as the history of some person that lived, 2,000 years or so. So it's the story, and that's the face value that most people see the story as. Is Jesus the person who lived this life? He had all these challenges, got killed on the cross, and so forth. But from an allegorical perspective, you can read the stories quite differently. The story of Jesus is our story, the story that each one of us is travelling on our spiritual journey. So the example of the crucifixion isn't something that's literal. It's something that's metaphoric. So when you start to begin to understand the language of parables and allegories, you realize that the crucifixion, or the cross in itself, is the point in one's life when the spirit awakens and the personality becomes the tool of the spirit and not the other way around. In this slide, I was trying to find a photo that I saw when I was in the Vatican, which was of Jesus kneeling down in front of the rock, a bit like this one, and praying to his Father. Except in this picture, he was sweating blood out of his head. It's a very, very powerful photo. So he, at this point, knew that this great test was in front of him, and he knew how hard the step was. Well, his personality knew how hard the step was. So, this is almost the last will and testimony of the personality, in this case of Jesus, before he became the Christ. It's looking at the allegory of stories is quite powerful. Another biblical story is that a prodigal son, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. So it's the story, the metaphysical meaning of two sons. It's from the Bible. Luke describes the two aspects of the soul or consciousness. So the two sons in the story are two aspects of the soul or consciousness. The son who stayed home is the religious or moral son. The son who went into the far-off country is a human incarnation of the soul. So he went off into all the pleasures of the senses and the passions. He really explored life as a human. So they're going off into the far country. They're separating the consciousness from the parent source. So it's a bit like us today. We're off the far off country. We've disconnected from the soul, from the heart. The first step in being able to return to the Father's house is repentance and confession. So this is a very Christian approach. If we are truly repentant, the Father will forgive. He will have compassion, and the bounty of divine mind will pour out upon him. You ever thought of the prodigal son in those two terms? It's the story of our journey. So our soul stays behind in the spirit world, let's say, but a part of it incarnates into human experience. So that's the prodigal son. Experiences life in this world and eventually returns back to the Father. Another one is the Wizard of Oz. You know, we had Dorothy Bell here. Was it early last year? Time sort of eludes me. She ran a 5-day program here, and it was about exploring the story of the Wizard of Oz. You know, and you think, how can you explore the Wizard of Oz in 5 days? But with really exploring the story and the character in the story, and then spending time reflecting and meditating on it, took each of us on our own journey as part of that school. So, you know, the story is full of symbols. You've got to, first of all, I should front up and say that, you know, the story was written by Frank Baum, who was a notable American theosophist. So the symbolism in the story is well understood from a theosophical perspective. For example, you know, the yellow brick road represents the evolving self. So Dorothy landed in Kansas, which was her dream place to go to. She landed on the yellow brick road, and she had to follow the yellow brick road to reach her own state of illumination. She had some silver shoes, although they're red in the movies, I know. Yeah. The movie found that the red shoes, the silver shoes didn't contrast well enough with the yellow brick road, so they changed them to red. You know, they represent the link between the material and the spiritual. You know, we often call this the silver cord, which is a term from the Bible, the Old Testament, the silver cord which unites the physical and the spiritual. And at the point of death, this silver cord detaches itself from us. Many people say it takes about 3 days, which is why Christians will never bury anybody for 3 days after their death, because, you know, the silver cord can reconnect again, or they can waken up again. So it's interesting, some of these stories. I remember reading an article recently that, you know, in New Zealand, that some funeral director was about to open up a person, whatever they do, and the person suddenly woke up. And that must have been a hell of a shock. I don't know if your husband's ever experienced that, Fiona, but so the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion were each searching for a brain, a heart, and courage. So the characters you meet along the way often represent qualities that you need to learn or to develop as part of your spiritual journey. Emphasizing that, you know, you can't really get very far on your spiritual journey without a brain that can discern and discriminate. Without a heart, you know, the poor Tin Man with no heart, and we're searching for the heart. He was searching for the heart as well. And then, of course, courage of the lion. You need the courage to keep going on the journey, I think, because it's a pretty tough journey. And then eventually they get to Oz, and they find that, you know, the wizard is quite a cruel sort of man. He's a humbug, I think they call him, a fraud. He was no wizard at all. So it's a long story, and you can You can look at it on YouTube, the original one. In the final part, of the story, Dorothy awakens on her return to Kansas in her heart mind. So she's gone home, where she started from, but her consciousness had moved from her mind into her heart. So her whole perception of Kansas had changed. So another story, which is one of my favourite, is the pilgrimage by Paulo Coelho. I don't know if any of you have come across him. He wrote, his most famous book is The Alchemist. But in my opinion, the better book is the Pilgrimage. So Paulo was going under some sort of initiation ceremony in Brazil, and all of the other students were given a sword to show that they completed what they have to do to become initiated. But when Paulo got there, he didn't get a sword. So he's a bit miffed. He went up to his teacher and said, well, where's my sword? Essentially, the teacher said, he wasn't, you're not ready for it yet. To get your sword, you've got to go and walk the Camino Trail in northern Spain. And all of you must have heard of the Camino Trail now. It's been on TV so many times. So this is this long, 3 or 4 month journey across Spain. And he said, your sword will be waiting for you at the end of the Camino Trail in the church. And I forget the name of the church. So he started walking this Camino Trail. And he had a guide to take him. But the first thing, he said, I don't want a guide, go away. And then after 3 days, he found he was going around in circles. So his lesson there was that guides can be helpful. Don't ignore guides when they appear. But I won't talk about the whole story, otherwise we'll be here till midnight. But essentially, every day on his journey, he was confronted by challenges along the way. It might have been a barking dog who bit him, it might have been falling down into a river or something. And he got so frustrated because this was slowing him down from getting a sword. Until suddenly he realized that each of those lessons, or each of those mishaps along the way, taught him something very important that he had to learn about himself on that journey. And he must have got about halfway, I think, and suddenly he got the click, and he realized that it wasn't the sword that was important. It was about being aware of everything that happens to you along the way, because it all has a lesson for us. And don't be confused that, when things happen to you, it was someone else's fault or someone else's doing. It's your story, it's your lesson. You need to read the story and get the lesson out of it. Only you can do that. So that's a metaphor for the kind of life to be lived, a life of awareness of the lessons that the universe has to teach us along our way. Now, there's lots of pilgrim stories. My favourite ones the last few years have been, Lord of the Rings. Now, I started reading Lord of the Rings in my teens. The Force. What's the Force? Star Wars. So we just had the last episode 9 come out. That was amazing. And then, there's Harry Potter. So they're all interesting stories, and they all have the allegorical way of looking at it. If you look at the main characters of these stories are us. And each of these characters have personal challenges to overcome. Like Frodo in Lord of the Rings, his journey was to take this ring and to destroy it. Yet, and all the way along, he was so attached to this ring, he couldn't let it go. He could never let it go. And it's really his two companions that were travelling with him that were very much a strong part of the story. You had Gollum. Gollum was interesting. One minute he was very much into his personality. The next minute he was almost a saint. So he epitomized the dual nature of personality. And at the end it was Gollum that destroyed the ring. And Sam, his faithful companion, all the way through, epitomized the qualities that you require on the journey. Who's our companion on our journeys? And what about, Star Wars? So Star Wars is all about, for me, Luke Skywalker. Then came, who's it, Ren Skywalker, as we learnt in the end. Well, she named herself that. But really, the story of Luke was that he was trying to epitomize goodness, the light, and his challenge was his father. And all of them are the same. Ren found his father was the evil, whatever his name was. And it epitomized, one is the light and one is the dark. Now often, as Theosophists, we try to always be the light. I think loads of people do this, but we also have the shadow within ourselves. And to become complete, it's important to integrate the light and the shadow together. Yeah, and this is what they all did as part of their journey. Now once again, Harry Potter represents the ideal, innocent, open-minded, inquisitive child nature that we have to develop as part of our spiritual journey. So look at life as though everything is a new moment of learning. So you can see the spiritual journey in all these different stories if you're willing to read a little bit deeper, to try and read the allegorical aspect of that story. So all those characters represent us. And why do we love these stories so much? Because in our heart, we know that's the journey that we're on. It may not be as literal as Luke Skywalker or Harry Potter or Frodo, but that's the journey we're on. So the journey is not about the destination, it's about the challenges we face along the way. That's the main point I'm trying to make in this part here, that to be aware of what's happening is part of the journey. Like, we just had our AGM this morning. It's an amazing experience to see people sitting together being able to disagree without being disagreeable. So it's all part of the process that we have to learn as part of our journey. As someone said that, committee meetings are our opportunity to learn how to work together. And the first lesson in the committee meeting is to detach yourself from expected outcomes and allow the process to take you where it needs to go. So it's interesting. Living Deeply. This is a book which explores transformational processes or transformation through research. So Living Deeply is a book published by the Institute of Noetic Science. I don't know if any of you have come across it. It's based upon a decade-long research program into transformative processes experienced by many people. So ICONS, or the Institute of Noetic Science, was founded by a NASA astronaut, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who had a life-changing, transformative experience on his return journey from the moon to the Earth. Any of you heard about his experience? Yeah. It completely changed his view of reality. And this happened to many astronauts who travelled from the moon to the Earth. And I can't recount the experience, but what was involved in it is seeing this blue planet, this whole blue planet. And then I guess recognising the distinctions that we have as a human race between race, religious beliefs, fighting, politics, and so on. Anyway, he went on to found the Institute of Noetic Science with the purpose of trying to understand from a scientific perspective what created these transformative experiences that he'd had. So I can't remember how many people they interviewed, but it was thousands of people that were interviewed who had transformative experience. And they found that there was no formula, no religion, or particular spiritual practice which induced transformative experiences. So they couldn't come up with a formula which produced transformative experiences. So it was interesting to read that part of the story. The book goes on and interviews many well-known people who have had these experiences, who's shared essential aspects of the journey of transformation. So various spiritual practices such as meditation do not directly bring about transformative changes. I found that quite interesting. However, such methods are often helpful in creating a fertile ground to enable such experiences to happen. And which points to the importance of, like when you create a garden, you spend a lot of time preparing the soil for that garden before you plant your seed, which can sprout and then grow. So this is what meditation is like. It's creating the fertile ground through which the experiences may happen. So they defined as part of their research, there's 4 important qualities for creating this fertile ground. So the first one is having the right intention of why, for what you're doing. So the intention, for example, to meditate. So why are you meditating? So if the intention is selfless and to learn to understand who you are, I think that's a good thing. But if your intention may be to develop occult powers and such things, then maybe you're getting a bit sidetracked. You need to have attention. So everything you're doing every day needs to have your full attention. That choiceless awareness needs to be developed. You need to repeat it over and over again. So it becomes a habit. So for me, it's trying to repeat being attentive to what's going through my mind all the time. It might be different for you. Having guidance is very helpful. This is a quote by Zeneca Hartman, which I thought sums it up quite well. Realization isn't something we can do, it's only something we can be ready for. Practice isn't the cause of realization, but it helps you to be more open and ready to receive what the universe has to offer. And I'm sure you've all seen similar quotes. So there's means of developing a heart-mind. So each of us must find our means or ways of developing a heart-mind or soul awareness. Some possible ways that may be helpful are: 1, a close and careful examination of the world in which we live. Which matrix are you in at the moment? Consider the advice of great teachers alongside your own experiences, reasoning, and of research. And so look at what the great teachers have to say, not what their disciples say, but look at what the great teachers themselves had to say. And then look at what science today has to say. Really research yourself at a very deep level. I find quantum physics is very helpful into understanding human nature and the way humanity works. You might find something else. So work carefully with, number two, work carefully with dispassion on exploring what is real and unreal, and being open to questioning our understanding of what we discover. We will quite possibly find that the things are not what they appear, which helps bring about change. So this is pretty hard because we take for granted most of what we believe. But how do we know it's true unless we're willing to take some time out and examine it? Our views are very much like that. You know, the most common, in my experience, the best way to recognize when your conditioning is confronting you is when you strongly disagree with what someone else has said. And this is a very powerful and very fortunate moment that you have to look at yourself. Why are you disagreeing with someone else's point of view or someone else's view? It's not because of what the person says, but it's because of your own particular view. So you need to look at why we react to things that are going on around us. And unless we're willing to look at that, you know, we get stuck in this perspective and this view, which can be very destructive at times. So the third step is to create a 24-hour choiceless mindful awareness practice. And the fourth is prepare the fertile ground for transformative experiences by setting up awareness practices. This is helpful for every individual who wishes to develop spiritual intuition or self-discovery or a heart-mind. You know, one of the adepts said, "Come out of your world into ours." So what he's saying is, come out of your psychological prison into our unconditioned world. So it's a big step. I tend to have been having a Krishnamurti moment. So I'm sharing that. So a meditative mind is silent. It is not the silence which thought can conceive of. It is not the silence of a still evening. It is the silence when thought, with all its images, its words, and perceptions, has entirely ceased. The meditative mind is the religious mind. The religion that is not touched by the church, the temple, or by chance. The religious mind is the explosion of love. It is this love that knows no separation. To it, far is near. It is not the one or the many, but rather that state of love in which all division ceases. Like beauty, it is not the measure of words. For this silence alone, the meditative mind acts. So from this silence alone, the meditative mind reacts. You know, Krishnamurti speaks so much about meditation. And certainly from my perception, he is one of the few people that I've come across in my lifetime that has moved into the heart mind completely. So he speaks from a place that is not understood by our psychological mind. So many people have challenged to understand what he has to say. So to summarize, awareness cannot be learned through ordinary means. It comes through the awakening of the heart. of true insight, to inner listening, to the inner voice. Now, Rumi would say, that we're in search of ourselves, and we open the door to find the self, to find that, really we are the self all along. We just don't realise it. So thank you, everybody.